Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Creepy Dread, your storyteller of choice. Today we have a variety of stories, from a creepy Wi-Fi signal to a camping weekend in a remote creepy place. And one story is sure to surprise you. Let me know in the comments which story it will be. I'm sure you'll guess it. Enough talk, and let's dive in. I wish you a good night. In the small, sleepy town of Ravenwood, there was an old house that everyone avoided. It was known as the Holloway Mansion. The mansion had been abandoned for decades, ever since the Holloway family mysteriously vanished one cold winter night. People said that the family had been cursed, and now their spirits roamed the house, whispering their regrets to anyone who dared to listen. One autumn evening, a young woman named Emma moved to Ravenwood. She was a journalist and had heard the rumors about the Holloway Mansion. Intrigued, she decided to investigate the old house for a story. She hoped that her article would reveal the truth behind the ghostly whispers and bring closure to the town's mystery. Emma arrived at the mansion just as the sun was setting. The house was enormous, with broken windows and ivy creeping up its walls. The once grand entrance was now a gaping maw of decay. Emma took a deep breath and walked up the creaking steps to the front door. She hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity won over her fear. The door swung open with a groan, and Emma stepped inside. The interior was just as she had imagined: dusty furniture covered in white sheets, cobwebs in the corners, and a heavy silence that seemed to press down on her. She turned on her flashlight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As Emma walked through the house, she noticed strange things. Old portraits of the Holloway family lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her as she moved. The air was cold, and the house seemed to be holding its breath. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine, but she pushed forward. In the library, Emma found an old journal on a dusty desk. The leather cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. She opened it carefully, revealing the diary of Thomas Holloway, the head of the family. The entries were filled with descriptions of strange occurrences: flickering lights, cold drafts, and whispers in the dark. The last entry was particularly unsettling. "The shadows are getting closer. I can hear them whispering my name. I fear they want something from us." Emma's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the journal's words. As she continued reading, she heard a faint whisper behind her. She spun around, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder, a soft, almost soothing murmur that seemed to come from all around her. She tried to ignore it and moved to another room. The whispering followed her. It seemed to be saying something she couldn't quite make out. Emma's flashlight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The temperature dropped, and her breath became visible in the cold air. Suddenly, Emma heard a loud bang from the floor above. She froze, listening intently. The whispering stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps echoing through the house. She decided to investigate the source of the noise. Her footsteps echoing as she climbed the stairs. The second floor was even darker. Emma's flashlight barely pierced the gloom, and the shadows seemed to grow thicker. She followed the sound of the footsteps to a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered from within. Emma pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The room was a small bedroom, furnished with an old, dust-covered bed and a rocking chair. The flickering light came from a single candle on the bedside table. Emma approached the candle, her eyes scanning the room. Suddenly, the candle's flame wavered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness. Emma's heart pounded as she fumbled for her flashlight, but it slipped from her hand and rolled away. The whispering returned, louder and more insistent. It filled the room with a haunting melody, growing closer and closer. Emma tried to stay calm. She felt her way around the room, searching for her flashlight. The whispers were now almost a roar, and she could feel a cold presence pressing in on her. Just as she was about to give up, her hand touched the flashlight. She quickly turned it on, and the beam cut through the darkness. The room was empty. The whispers had stopped. Emma was sweating and shaking. Took a deep breath and decided it was time to leave. She turned to the door, but as she did, she saw something in the corner of her eye, a shadowy figure standing by the window. Emma gasped and backed away. The figure was indistinct, shrouded in darkness, but it seemed to be watching her. The shadow moved, and Emma saw it extend a hand towards her, as if beckoning her to come closer. Fear gripped her, but she forced herself to move. She hurried out of the room and down the stairs, her footsteps pounding as she fled the house. She could still hear the whispering, growing fainter as she reached the front door. She burst out into the cold night air, gasping for breath. Emma looked back at the mansion. The windows seemed to glow with an otherworldly light, and the whispers had turned into a mournful wail. She knew she had to leave Ravenwood and never return to the Holloway mansion. The next day, Emma wrote her article, but she didn't include the whispers or the shadowy figure. She described the mansion as an eerie, decaying house with a tragic history. The article was published, and it caught the interest of many readers, but the true nature of the Holloway mansion remained a mystery. Emma left Ravenwood and never spoke of her experience again. The mansion remained abandoned, a dark secret hidden within its crumbling walls, and though the townspeople continued to avoid it, some still claimed they could hear the whispers of the Holloway family on quiet, moonlit nights. To this day, if you stand outside the Holloway mansion late at night, you might just hear the faintest of whispers carried on the wind, as the shadows continue to tell their stories in the darkness. The Wilson family had been planning their camping trip for months. They were looking forward to a weekend away from the hustle and bustle of city life, surrounded by nature and the peace it promised. Jim and Lisa Wilson, along with their 2 children, Emma and Jake, packed up their car and headed out early Friday morning. The drive to the remote campsite took them deep into the woods, away from the noise and chaos of everyday life. The winding roads and thick forests only added to the sense of adventure. As they arrived at the campsite, the sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the sparkling lake nearby. The air was fresh and filled with the scent of pine. Wilson set up their tent in a small clearing and spent the day enjoying the great outdoors. Emma and Jake splashed around in the lake, their laughter echoing across the water. Jim and Lisa watched from the shore, happy to see their children so carefree and content. Later, they all went for a hike through the forest, marveling at the beauty and tranquility of the place. As evening fell, the family gathered around a campfire. They roasted marshmallows and told stories, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. It was a perfect day, and they went to sleep that night feeling grateful for the time together. The first night passed peacefully, and the family awoke refreshed and ready for another day of adventure. Something had changed. As they prepared breakfast, a sense of unease hung in the air. Emma and Jake began to argue over trivial things, their voices rising in frustration. "I want to go home," Jake whined, crossing his arms defiantly. "Me too," Emma chimed in, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a frown. Lisa and Jim exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what had caused the sudden shift in mood. They managed to calm the children down and encourage them to enjoy the day. "We came here to have fun, remember?" Jim said, trying to lift their spirits. Reluctantly, Emma and Jake agreed, and the family spent the day swimming, exploring, and trying to recreate the magic of the previous day. But the sense of unease lingered, like a shadow that refused to be shaken. As darkness fell, family retreated to their tent, hoping for another peaceful night. But as the forest around them fell silent, Lisa found herself unable to sleep. It was then that she heard it. Soft, creeping footsteps outside the tent, accompanied by a low, demonic panting that sent shivers down her spine. She held her breath, listening intently, trying to convince herself it was just the wind or a passing animal. But the noises grew louder, and Lisa's heart began to race. It wasn't just one creature. There were several, circling the tent, their footsteps light but purposeful. Suddenly, something hit the side of the tent with a force that made Lisa jump. She stifled a scream, her mind racing with fear. She shook Jim awake, her voice barely a whisper. "Jim, wake up. There's something outside." Jim groggily opened his eyes, but the noise outside made him instantly alert. The creatures began to hit the tent more aggressively, their laughter echoing in the night like a cruel mockery. The children woke up, fear etched on their faces as they clung to their parents. The tent was under siege, the creatures outside relentless in their attack. The laughter grew louder, more maniacal, as if they were feeding off the family's terror. Jim tried to remain calm, his mind racing for a solution. "Stay together," he whispered, his voice shaking. "We'll wait until they leave." But the creatures showed no signs of leaving. Instead, they grew bolder, their blows to the tent more forceful, their laughter a nightmarish sound that seemed to come from all directions. Lisa held Emma and Jake close, trying to shield them from the terror unfolding around them. She whispered soothing words, even as her own fear threatened to overwhelm her. The night stretched on, the family trapped in their tent, surrounded by the malevolent presence outside. Every sound seemed amplified, every laugh a reminder of their helplessness. As dawn approached, the laughter began to fade, the creatures retreating into the shadows from which they came. The silence that followed was deafening, leaving the Wilsons shaken and exhausted. With trembling hands, Jim unzipped the tent, peering out into the morning light. The campsite appeared untouched, the forest calm and serene, as if the night's horrors had been nothing more than a bad dream. But the Wilsons knew better. They quickly packed up their belongings, eager to leave the place behind and never return. The drive back home was silent, each family member lost in their thoughts, the memory of the night haunting them. They had come seeking peace and adventure, but instead found something far darker. Once home, they vowed never to speak of what had happened, each hoping that time would erase the memories of that terrifying night. But in the quiet moments, when darkness fell and the wind howled outside, they would remember the laughter and the creatures that had surrounded them, a reminder of the unknown horrors lurking in the remote corners of the world. Anna Carter wasn't one to shy away from an adventure. As a tech-savvy individual who thrived on urban exploration, she often sought out derelict sites in her city, hoping to uncover the hidden stories etched into the walls of forgotten structures. Her friends, however, never accompanied her on these outings, opting instead for more conventional activities. But Anna didn't mind. The solitude made her explorations feel like personal quests. It was on one such expedition that Anna stumbled upon the old Winthrop building. Located on the edge of town and hidden behind a veil of overgrown trees and rusty chain-link fences, the building had been vacant for years, shrouded in mystery and forgotten by most. Yet what caught Anna's attention wasn't the building itself, but rather an odd, flickering Wi-Fi signal on her phone, labeled "Come Find Me." The Wi-Fi signal was strange. Anna knew that abandoned buildings rarely, if ever, had working utilities. Yet here was a beacon calling to her, urging her to explore. It was almost as if the building was alive, the digital pulse beating beneath decaying surface. Curiosity piqued, Anna decided to investigate. Entering the building, Anna found the air thick with dust and decay, floorboards creaking beneath her feet. The hallways stretched before her like a labyrinth, shadowy and unwelcoming. Despite the creeping unease, she felt a thrill of excitement. She had stumbled upon something potentially significant, something that promised more than just the usual urban decay. She followed the strength of the signal deeper into the building, her phone serving as a makeshift compass. The air grew colder as she approached the heart of the structure, and the signal's intensity increased with each step. Finally, she arrived at a small room with a single unassuming wooden door slightly ajar. Pushing the door open, Anna found herself in a room stripped bare of any furnishings. The walls were peeling, and a single, grimy window allowed a trickle of light to filter in. In the center of the room stood a dusty old computer atop a rickety wooden desk. The monitor hummed softly, and the screen glowed with a warm, inviting light. The Wi-Fi signal was at its strongest here, its presence palpable and unsettling. Anna hesitated, sensing a warning deep in her gut. But curiosity, that relentless force, pushed her forward. She approached the computer and sat in the chair, its old springs groaning under her weight. The screen displayed a single prompt: "Enter your name." With a slight tremor in her hands, Anna typed her name. The screen flickered, and a series of strange characters filled the display. Her phone vibrated violently in her pocket, startling her. When she glanced at it, she found it displaying the same bizarre script. Her phone's screen flashed again, this time showing a simple text message. "Welcome, Anna. Let us play a game." As she stared at the message, an icy sensation crawled up her spine. It felt as though unseen eyes were watching her, their gaze penetrating the walls of the decrepit room. Suddenly, the room's temperature dropped sharply, her breath visible in the frigid air. The computer screen flashed, revealing a series of images, each more disturbing than the last. Ghostly figures, shadowy hands reaching out from the darkness, and twisted faces contorted in silent screams. Anna tried to turn away. Something compelled her to continue watching. The images blurred together, forming a nightmarish montage that seemed to penetrate her mind, peeling back layers of her consciousness to expose her deepest fears. Her heartbeat quickened, pounding loudly in her ears. The computer screen went dark, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was Anna's ragged breathing. Then, the monitor flickered back to life, displaying a new message. "Find me, Anna. I'm waiting." A sense of dread washed over her. She felt trapped, as if the room itself were a cage, the shadows closing in around her. Despite her growing fear, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had to see this through. She rose from the chair and stepped back into the hallway. The air was colder now, the shadows longer and deeper. As she moved through the building, the Wi-Fi signal continued to guide her, its presence a sinister beacon in the darkness. The further Anna ventured into the building, the more distorted reality seemed to become. The walls appeared to breathe, pulsing in time with the flickering lights overhead. Whispering voices echoed through the corridors, their words unintelligible, yet filled with malice. In one room, Anna found a mirror, its surface cracked and tarnished. As she peered into it, she saw a reflection that wasn't her own. The image showed a version of herself that was older, gaunt, and haunted. The eyes staring back at her were filled with despair, and when the figure smiled, its teeth were sharp and predatory. Panicking, Anna turned away from the mirror and stumbled back into the hallway. The whispers grew louder, mocking her, taunting her with secrets only they knew. Desperation clawed at Anna's mind as she continued to wander the labyrinthine hallways. It felt as though the building was shifting around her, altering its layout to confound and confuse. Each room she entered held its own horrors, from phantom apparitions to grotesque visions that defied explanation. As she tried to make sense of it all, her phone vibrated again. This time, the message was more urgent. "You're running out of time, Anna. Find me before it's too late." Anna realized with a jolt that she was no longer just an explorer. She was a participant in a twisted game, one where the stakes were her own sanity. The realization filled her with a renewed sense of urgency. She had to find the source of the signal and end this nightmare. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Anna finally reached the building's basement. The air was damp and heavy, the walls slick with moisture. The Wi-Fi signal was strongest here, a tangible presence that seemed to seep into her very bones. At the far end of the basement, she discovered a door with no handle, its surface etched with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. As she approached, the door slowly creaked open, revealing a room bathed in a sickly green glow. Inside, a figure stood with its back to her, silhouetted against a bank of flickering computer screen. The screens displayed the same twisted imagery she had seen earlier, a never-ending cycle of horror. Summoning her courage, Anna called out to the figure. It turned slowly, revealing a face that was disturbingly familiar. Her own. The doppelganger smiled, its eyes void of humanity, filled instead with a malevolent intelligence. The doppelganger spoke, its voice a distorted echo of Anna's own. "You found me, but this is just the beginning. The internet is a doorway, Anna, a gateway to the darkest corners of the mind." As the words sank in, the room began to spin, the images on the screens blurring together into a kaleidoscope of terror. Anna felt herself being pulled into the vortex, her sense of self unraveling like a frayed thread. She tried to resist, to hold on to her identity, but the pull was too strong. As she succumbed to the darkness, she realized that she had become part of the building, a new ghost in its haunted halls, forever trapped in the cycle of horror. Anna Carter was never seen again, her disappearance a mystery that only added to the legend of the Winthrop building. The Wi-Fi signal continued to beckon, a silent siren call to those who dared to venture too close. The building remained, a monument to the unknowable horrors lurking just beneath the surface of the digital world. Steve had always been a fan of horror stories, just like you who are listening to this right now. There was something about the thrill of being creeped out in your own home that he found very stimulating. So when he discovered a podcast dedicated to scary stories, he thought it would be the perfect way to fall asleep. Little did he know that this decision would turn his nights into a nightmare. It started on a typical Monday night. After a long day at work, Steve lay in bed, earbuds snugly in place, ready to unwind with the latest episode. The narrator's voice was soothing, lulling him into a state of relaxation as he recounted tales of haunted houses, malevolent spirits, and cursed objects. As the first story unfolded, Steve felt his eyelids grow heavy. He was just drifting off when he heard a faint noise, a soft whisper that seemed to echo from somewhere within his room. At first, he dismissed it as his imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by the eerie story. But the whisper came again, more insistent this time. It was a voice, low and unintelligible, threading through the narrative like a sinister undertone. Steve sat up, pulling out his earbuds and glancing around the room. His bedroom was silent, bathed in the soft glow of the street lamp outside. Shaking off the unease, he lay back down and resumed the podcast. Yet, as the narrator continued, the whispers persisted, weaving in and out of the story with increasing clarity. Steve could almost make out words now, dark and foreboding, like a warning he couldn't quite grasp. The next night, Steve found himself hesitating before pressing play. The strange whispers had left him feeling unsettled, but curiosity got the better of him. He was determined to understand what was happening, convinced that there was a logical explanation. As the story unfolded, Steve became aware of another noise, soft footsteps, padding across the carpet. He froze, every muscle tense, straining to hear. The footsteps circled his bed, slow and deliberate, as if something unseen was prowling the darkness. His heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of fear. He flicked on the bedside lamp, casting light into every corner, but the room was empty, as still and silent as ever. Steve chuckled nervously, attributing the noise to the podcast playing tricks on his mind. On the third night, Steve tried to convince himself that it was all in his head. He settled into bed and pressed play, determined to enjoy the story without succumbing to his imagination. The narrator's voice was smooth and captivating, drawing him into a tale of a long-abandoned asylum and the horrors that lingered within. As the story progressed, Steve felt a chill in the air, an icy breath that caressed his skin and raised goosebumps along his arms. He pulled the blankets tighter, trying to ignore the creeping dread that seeped into his bones. Then he saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the foot of his bed. It was a dark silhouette, featureless and ominous, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Steve's breath hitched in his throat, and he blinked rapidly, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But the figure remained, shifting slightly as if it were stepping closer. Panic surged through Steve, and he lunged for the lamp, flooding the room with light. The figure vanished instantly, leaving him trembling and alone in the illuminated room. By the fourth night, Steve was exhausted. He had spent the day reassuring himself that it was all just his imagination, but the fear lingered, an unwelcome companion that refused to leave. Despite his apprehension, he returned to the podcast, unable to resist the pull of the unknown. The story was darker this time, a tale of demonic possession and the terror it wrought upon an unsuspecting family. Steve felt the air grow heavier with each passing minute, pressing down on him like a weight. The whispers returned, louder and more distinct, their words twisted and malevolent. As the narrator's voice droned on, the room seemed to close in around him, the shadows stretching and distorting into grotesque shapes. He could feel a presence hovering just out of sight, watching him with cold, unfeeling eyes. A sudden crash shattered the silence, and Steve bolted upright, his heart racing. The sound had come from the hallway. A loud and violent disturbance echoed through the stillness. He stumbled out of bed, fear gripping him tightly as he crept toward the door. Steve reached the hallway, his hand trembling as he flicked on the light. The corridor was empty, the doors closed and undisturbed. Yet the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. an invisible gaze piercing through the darkness. A shadow moved at the edge of his vision, darting down the stairs. Steve hesitated, fear and curiosity warring within him. Driven by an inexplicable urge, followed, the darkness closing in around him. He descended into the gloom. The air was frigid in the living room, the temperature plunging as he stepped into the shadows. Steve could see the outline of a figure standing just beyond the reach of the light, its form shifting and indistinct. "Who are you?" Steve's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper in the oppressive silence. The figure didn't respond, but the whispers filled the air, a chorus of voices speaking in a language he couldn't comprehend. Steve backed away slowly, his mind racing. He knew he had to stop this, to break whatever connection the stories had forged with the darkness that had invaded his home. In a moment of clarity, he ripped the earbuds from his ears and threw the phone across the room. The whispers ceased instantly, the air clearing as if a fog had lifted. The figure remained, watching him with silent intensity. Steve could feel its power waning, the grip of the darkness loosening. He turned on every light in the house, banishing the shadows to the corners. The figure faded, its presence a memory that lingered just out of reach. Steve knew he couldn't stay there, not with the remnants of the horror still clinging to the walls. The following day, Steve packed his things and left, determined to put the nightmare behind him. He vowed never to listen to scary stories again, the allure of the unknown tainted by the terror he had experienced. As he drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within him, a darkness that lurked just beneath the surface. But he pushed the thought aside, focusing on the road ahead and the promise of a fresh start. Yet, deep down, Steve knew that the shadows would always be there, waiting for the moment when he would let his guard down, and in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep, he could still hear the whispers, echoing softly in the recesses of his mind. Jack had always been drawn to places long forgotten by the world. As an urban explorer, he found a strange beauty in abandoned buildings, each telling its own story of time, neglect, and mystery. Armed with a camera and a flashlight, Jack ventured into these lost places, hoping to capture their secrets. When Jack heard about the abandoned Ravenwood Psychiatric Clinic, his curiosity was piqued. The clinic had been closed for decades, shrouded in rumors and ghost stories that warned people away. But for Jack, those stories were an invitation, a challenge he couldn't resist. Early one Saturday morning, Jack arrived at the clinic, its imposing structure looming against the gray sky. Vines crawled up the crumbling walls, and broken windows stared out like hollow eyes. The air was thick with decay and the scent of rain-soaked earth. Jack made his way inside through a broken door, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty lobby. The clinic was silent, save for the distant drip of water and the rustle of leaves in the wind. He took a deep breath, savoring the sense of adventure that tingled in his veins. He wandered through the dark, narrow corridors, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The walls were covered in peeling paint and graffiti, remnants of those who had come before him. Dust motes danced in the air, stirred by his passage. As he explored, Jack imagined the patients who once inhabited this place, their lives confined within these walls. The thought sent a chill down his spine, a reminder of the dark history that lingered here. After hours of exploring the upper floors, Jack felt an irresistible pull toward the basement. He found a staircase at the end of a long corridor, the steps descending into the darkness below. Hesitation flickered through his mind, but curiosity won out. The basement was colder, the air damp and heavy. His flashlight revealed long, shadowy corridors lined with doors, each leading to rooms filled with forgotten equipment, decaying furniture. As Jack ventured deeper into the basement, he began to hear faint noises, footsteps and voices, distant but unmistakable. He paused, listening intently, his heart pounding in his chest. Who could be down here? Driven by a mix of fear and intrigue, Jack followed the sounds, his footsteps cautious and silent. The noises grew louder as he moved closer, echoing through the empty halls. At the end of the corridor, Jack discovered a large hole in the wall, as if something had burst through from the other side. The opening revealed a narrow passage that sloped downward, the air colder and thicker the further he went. Jack hesitated, but the thrill of discovery urged him on. He stepped through the hole, finding himself at the top of a long staircase that spiraled into the darkness below. The voices were clearer now, chanting in a language he couldn't understand. He descended the stairs cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. As he reached the bottom, he found himself in a large, cavernous room illuminated by the flickering glow of torches. The sight before him was like something out of a nightmare. A group of people dressed in pitch-black robes stood in a circle, their faces hidden by hoods. They chanted in unison, their voices rising and falling in a chilling rhythm. In the center of the circle lay a stone altar, stained dark with something Jack didn't want to imagine. Symbols and markings covered the floor, drawn in a substance that glistened ominously in the torchlight. Jack's heart raced as he watched, a mix of terror and fascination holding him in place. He raised his camera, capturing the scene in a series of photos and videos, each click of the shutter echoing in the silence. As he crept closer, hoping to get a better view, his foot slipped on the damp stone, sending a small rock skittering across the floor. The sound cut through the chanting, drawing the cult's attention like a spotlight. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the robed figures turned toward Jack, their faces hidden in shadow. Panic surged through him as he realized he'd been discovered. He stumbled backward, nearly dropping his camera as he fumbled for a way to escape. "Who dares to disturb our ritual?" a voice demanded, cold and sharp. It was a woman, her voice resonating with power and menace. Before Jack could respond, the cult members rushed toward him, their movements swift and coordinated. Fear propelled him into action, and he turned and ran, sprinting back up the stairs with the cult hot on his heels. Corridors blurred past as Jack ran, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Cult's footsteps echoed behind him, relentless and unforgiving. He pushed himself harder, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He took twists and turns through the clinic, his mind racing as he searched for an exit. The building felt like a maze, each hallway looking the same as panic threatened to overwhelm him. The cult was gaining on him, their footsteps growing louder with each passing second. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, his fear driving him forward even as exhaustion began to set in. In his frantic search for escape, Jack made a wrong turn and found himself trapped in a dead-end corridor. He skidded to a halt, his heart sinking as he realized there was nowhere to run. Before he could react, the cult members closed in, surrounding him with their dark presence. Their eyes glinted with malice from beneath their hoods, and Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "You've seen too much," the woman from before said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried an undercurrent of danger. Jack backed away, his back hitting the wall as fear clawed at his mind. "Please, I didn't mean to." "Silence," the woman snapped, cutting him off. "You have trespassed where you do not belong." The cult members seized Jack, their grips unyielding as they dragged him back down into the depths of the clinic. He struggled against them, but they were too strong, their numbers too many. They led him back to the cavernous room where the altar awaited, its surface cold and foreboding. Jack's mind raced, searching for a way out. The cult had him pinned, their intentions clear. As they forced him onto the altar, Jack's mind reeled with horror. The chanting resumed, the voices rising in a sinister crescendo. The woman stood over him, a ceremonial dagger in her hand, blade glinting wickedly in the torchlight. Fear threatened to paralyze him, but survival instincts kicked in. Desperation fueled his action as he struggled against his captor, his heart pounding in his ears. With a burst of adrenaline, Jack managed to break free from their grip, his movements fueled by sheer terror. He lashed out, catching one of the cult members off guard and sending them stumbling backward. Chaos erupted as he fought his way out, his determination to survive giving him strength. He dodged and weaved through the cult, his focus on the exit and escape from this nightmare. He ran with every ounce of energy he had left, his breath ragged and his heart pounding. The corridors flew by in a blur as he made his way back through the clinic, cult's shouts echoing behind him. Bursting out into the daylight, Jack didn't stop until he reached the safety of his car. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, and finally managed to start the engine. Driving away from the clinic, Jack's mind was a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. Images of what he had seen played over and over in his mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness lurking beneath the surface of the world. He drove until he was far from the clinic, until the fear began to ebb and the adrenaline faded. He pulled over to the side of the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he tried to steady his breathing. The camera sat on the passenger seat, a reminder of the evidence he had gathered. He knew he had to tell someone, to warn others about the cult and their terrifying ritual. But the thought of going back, of facing that darkness again, filled him with dread. In the end, Jack decided to share his story anonymously, hoping that it would be enough to keep others away from the clinic and the horrors it held. He never returned to urban exploring, the thrill of discovery tainted by the memory of that fateful day. And as the sun set on the horizon, Jack knew he would never forget the forbidden asylum and the secrets it had revealed. Secrets he would carry with him for the rest of his life.